Okay, welcome everyone. Our guests are coming into the room one by one. Thank you for making time to join this event today on behalf of all of our colleagues at Bentham Science. We welcome all researchers, students, librarians, everyone from our Polish consortium. Welcome everyone and thank you for making time today. Our topic today is journal selection and submission. Pathways to Successful Publishing. Today, we'll talk you through some approaches that you can use to choose a journal, how to navigate through open access journals, and we'll talk a little bit more about Bentham Science and also help you to navigate the submission and peer review process. And our expert presenter today is my colleague, Dr. Gareth Dyke. Gareth, how are you today?
Doing very well indeed. Thank you very much, Scott. How are you? How's things?
Doing very well. It's a lovely, sunny, crisp day here in Tokyo. I understand it's very cold in many other parts of the world just now in the northern half, but here it's a very nice day. How about you, sir? Where are you today?
I'm in China and it's quite nice. The weather's good. Bit foggy, but all good. So we're saying good evening, but we know that it's still in the morning for our friends in the Bentham Science Polish Consortium. How's everybody doing? Do let us know your name, maybe a little bit about your subject area, your research area. Put that information into the Zoom chat. And of course, Q&A and other fantastic goodies coming up later, right, Scott?
Yes, we will have a question and answer session, so don't be shy. If you have any questions for Professor Dyke, feel free to either type them into the Q&A box, or if you can't access that, you can just type them into the chat. And Gareth, we love questions, don't we?
Absolutely. There are no silly questions. Do let us know. And this is a very popular topic, very important topic, all about journal selection, submission, pathways to successful publication. And you're joining us today because this event is hosted by our friends at Bentham Science Publishers, right, Scott?
Yes, and we're happy to be back. We did do an event, I believe it was last year or the year before, with the Polish Consortium, and it was a wonderful event. We had a great turnout, excellent participation from guests, excellent questions from all of our friends in Poland, from our researchers in Poland. So we're very happy to be back on behalf of our friends at Bentham Science. If you are joining us for the first time, if you are not familiar with Bentham Science Publishers, Bentham was founded in 1993. Professor Atta himself is a scientist, cares very much about science, cares very much about ethics and peer review. And Bentham Science has followed that approach since it's started. It's a growth publisher, as you can see, with a number of traditional journals, also open access journals, which Gareth will explain tonight, and also a significant number of ebooks. And a lot of Bentham journals and books tend to be in the life sciences and in the biology and so on. And you can learn more about Bentham journals at the links you can see at the bottom of the slide. I'll put links into the chat so you can explore Bentham's titles yourself. And it's worth noting that Bentham is listed in all the major indexes or indices, depending how you pronounce it, and also is a member of COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics. So we will put some links in the chat so you can explore more about Bentham. We also have a link here. You can click on the QR code here and you can come and visit the landing page for all of our researchers based in Poland. I'll put the link in the chat there, eurekaselect.com/Poland, and you can see more links there to our read and publish agreement, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Back to you, Gareth.
Absolutely fantastic. Don't forget to have a look at these links. Scan that QR code, get access to all of those fantastic journals, ebooks, and other opportunities available to you as members of the fantastic Bentham Science Polish Consortium. And I see that just a handful of people have said hello in the chat. Don't be shy. Nice to see you, Trev. Nice to see you, Monica. Everybody else, let us know where you are, who you are, what you're studying. That helps us to target these events in future. And it also helps the team at Bentham to come back with content, to come back with solutions specific to help you get your work published. So do have a look at these fantastic links, these QR codes, as Scott was sharing just now. This morning, we're going to be talking about the academic publishing cycle. As Scott mentioned, if you have questions, do put them into the chat box. We'll be back to to answer any questions a little bit later on. We do webinars, Scott and I, with partner institutions, partner publishers all over the world about this academic publishing cycle. It's a hamster wheel, right, Scott? People tend to go round and around all the time, this cycle.
It is. And today we'll actually be focusing on several stages of this cycle from journal selection to submission, peer review, and so on. So we'll cover at least three nodes of this hamster wheel today.
Absolutely fantastic. And if you enjoy this event, you'd like us to come back and do more, perhaps for your university or for the Polish Consortium of Universities as a whole, do let us know. But let's get going. Let's have a think about what we're going to be talking about in our event today. Four elements, as Scott just said, four components of that hamster wheel of academic publishing. First, we'll talk about publishing and open access. Big area of confusion for researchers all over the world. Then we're going to talk about journal selection and tips for article submission. Also a problem for researchers everywhere in the world. Then we'll talk about communication with editors, something that we find doing these training events is often something that researchers don't know that they can do. Communicating, talking with editors at different journals. And then finally, a real strength of Bentham science, peer review. We're going to talk about that, how to understand it, how to manage peer review at the end of our event today. As we mentioned, any questions, do get in touch. Let's jump in, let's begin, let's dive in and start talking about publishing and open access in the first place. Well, you're probably asking, what is open access publishing? Well, open access publishing is part of what we call the open science movement. And of course, as the name suggests, this implies that all of your data, research, publications, ideas, content are freely accessible for everybody. So open science, very popular, of course, it intersects with a number of key research principles like open data, fair data practices, and of course, collaborative research. If you choose to publish your research open access, you're going to get greater visibility, improved reproducibility, and of course, more collaborations, purely because more people around the world in different research groups in different countries will get to see the work that you publish. It won't be behind a paywall. That's the traditional model, of course, for academic publishing. So, open access is a key pillar of the broader open science movement. It means, as we've just been discussing, that your research outputs, if published open access, will be freely accessible to anyone, everyone, in any country, in any institution, anywhere in the world. And this can include articles, data, results, and also sometimes, as we'll talk about a little bit later, peer review as well. Open peer review is one component of open access publishing. Not all journals do it. Far from all journals that are open access do this, but it is part of the whole system of open access publishing. And key points about this publishing model are that you will own the copyright. If you publish a paper open access with Bentham or another publisher, you, the researcher, own the copyright. It's covered by a copyright license that we call a CC license that allows reuse by other people, by other colleagues, by other researchers, so long as they cite your original work. And of course, all open access articles are permanently archived in recognized repositories like PubMed Central, like preprint platforms, for example. So that's what it is. I guess many of you will have already known about open access publishing, but perhaps you don't know yet why and how it initially developed as a publishing model. There are several key drivers behind open access publishing. The first is, of course, a crisis in scholarly publishing as the cost of publishing papers for publishers and access to that content at libraries has increased. So rising subscription costs and shrinking budgets around the world. We're all familiar with that, being academic researchers. And of course, researchers, us, universities, funders, and even governments have pushed over the years, over the last 15 to 20 years, for more research outputs to be published open access. Of course they have. If I'm giving you money from the European Union or from the Polish government to do research, I want to see that research open access available to everybody. It makes a lot of sense. And that's why we've seen things like Subscribe to Open, Plan S within the European Union, for example. And of course, researchers as well demand access to up-to-date resources, demand up-to-date access to content online, open access. And of course, these days, more and more technologies, AI and whatnot, developing all the time. It's just much easier than it was even a few years ago to get access to content, to disseminate articles and connect with researchers all over the world. So that's open access publishing, but did you know there are several different models for open access publishing that balance cost, accessibility, and your control over the content that you publish it. And there are three main ones that we're just going to touch on here. The first is gold open access, and that's the most common because that's where you publish a paper in a journal and it's freely accessible for everybody to access, but there's a fee, some kind of article processing charge or cost collected by the publisher to pay for that. So gold open access, think PLOS, Frontiers, MDPI, all of those fantastic open access publishers, as well as publishers like Bentham, who convert a lot of their journals to open access. These are hybrid journals. You can publish in them for free, but then the content is paywalled to subscribers, or you can pay a fee to make your article fully open access. That's gold. Green, on the other hand, and we can all do this, we can all publish green open access. That's where you pick a journal that's going to publish your work behind a paywall, traditional publishing, but you choose to put your work in late stage draft onto a preprint platform or onto your institutional repository or onto your own website. So ResearchGate, Academia, all of these networking platforms that people use, putting a late stage version, perhaps the version of the paper that was finally accepted but not yet published, onto a platform. That's green open access. Diamond, finally, is where there's no charge, no fee, no cost for full open access publishing. And this is most often seen in cases where universities or societies or even charitable foundations that are also publishers are covering the cost of a journal and therefore not charging any fees to researchers. So this is important to know, open access publishing and these several different models within the open access publishing ecosystem. So, in summary, traditional publishing where paywalls restrict access, funded by subscriptions, access possible only if you or your institution has a subscription. We've all seen this, we've all been there, we've all tried to download papers that we can't access because a paywall pops up. Open access, freely available to everybody, often funded by author fees, APCs, institutional support, or a model called Subscribe to Open. This is the basis of open access publishing. If you choose to do it, you get more readers, you get more citations, you get access to altmetric data, greater impact and visibility, purely because more people are going to see your paper. It's not hidden behind a subscription paywall, often compliance with funder mandates, access to global collaboration, and this levels the playing field for you as a researcher all over the world. It's really a great idea. We support it very strongly. However, there's often a cost, as we're all very well aware. Do have a look at Bentham Open. This is the gold OA division of our fabulous friends at Bentham Science Publishers. 39 fully open access journals at the moment. So do have a look at that if you're looking for a fully open access place to publish your research. All of the other Bentham journals as well, of course, are hybrid. And by that we mean you can publish in them for free, or you can convert your paper to open access by paying an article processing charge. Those are hybrid journals. So quickly then, we do also encourage you to have a look at preprint platforms, a great place to share your research. Preprints, of course, are complete research papers shown to the public before being peer reviewed and published in a journal. So if you've got a piece of work that you've completed or a conference presentation that you've done, you want to share it with everybody, why not put it on a preprint platform? People worry about these. They think about copyright. Won't my work get stolen? Very common question that Scott and I get asked in these events. But don't worry, you're actually better protected if you put your work onto a preprint platform because then it's protected, it's stamped, it has that CC license on the work. So we'll talk about the different kinds of licenses and in the Q&A session at the end, but you will be better protected if you put your work onto a preprint platform before sending it to a journal for peer review and publication. So do have a think about this as well as a researcher. So let's have a quick think about preprints. Let's see if you've been paying attention. Scott, how are we doing so?
Okay, doing great so far. And we encourage everyone to ask questions to Gareth or post your comments in the chat. In the meantime, here's a quick poll about preprints. One of the questions that we often get asked is what copyrights do you keep? You probably, if you were paying attention, noticed on Gareth's slide just a minute ago, what copyrights do you keep? Do you keep all of them? Do you keep some of them? Or do you give up your copyrights when you post, or excuse me, when you publish on a preprint server? Let's see what our guests think.
Well, if you've been paying attention, you'd know the answer to this, and that does seem to be borne out in our responses to the poll so far, right, Scott?
Great. This was an easy question just to see if everyone's paying attention. Let's end the poll there. I think everyone pretty much got it. You get to keep all the copyrights in most cases. Gareth, have you used preprint servers often in your career?
A few times, yeah, because I'm quite old. These kinds of models for publishing are a little bit more recent. Researchers have some concerns about them, but yeah, I mean, it's a great way to share your work. So if you go to a conference, you give a talk, for example, how are you going to protect yourself against being stolen, about that work being taken by somebody else? Well, one way to do that is to use a preprint platform. It's a great approach. And yeah, the answer, of course, to our poll question, you get to keep all the copyright. So well done, everybody. I see that 82% of our attendees were awake during the first part of our presentation this evening, which is great to see. Let's move on. Let's talk about journal selection and submission. Again, any questions about this first part, do hold on to them or put them in the chat. We'll be back in a bit to answer any questions. Submission to journals can take time and can be problematic for researchers. It takes a lot of time to go from a new submission into a journal's workflow all the way through to eventual acceptance. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the steps that journals go through that you may not be aware of, such as editorial review. You know about peer review. Your paper gets sent out for peer review, but decisioning, checking, sending the paper back into the system for subsequent revisions is often something that authors are not really well aware of, and it can take a decent amount of time. But what we spend our time often talking about in these events is the question of how you can ensure that your research, your fantastic research, stands out when you make a submission to a journal. And the key here is picking a good journal, picking the right place to publish your paper. Journal selection, therefore, something that not a lot of researchers spend a great deal of time thinking about. I know that I didn't when I was working as a researcher, but this is key. Having a good journal to send your paper to will make sure that your work stands out from all of those other papers that are being published every year. Millions and millions and millions of research articles being published every year, up to 30, 40,000 each month just in the medical and health sciences. So you've got to maximize your message. You need to know before you start to write three things. Your message. What is it that you want people reading your paper to gain from that experience? Who are the audience? Which journal are you going to pick? And the structure. Message, audience, and structure are key elements for you to have in mind before you begin writing a research article. And also, we talk about building mentorship groups, how you can come up with effective peer review suggestions. Are international colleagues aware of you and aware of your work? And as we've talked about already, it's a good idea to have a look at using preprint platforms as a way of sharing your work with the world. So, journal selection means that you're going to find the best possible outlet, the best possible audience for your paper. And this is important because it speeds up your article publication. It maximizes the impact of your paper and it helps you also understanding about journals to avoid and detect fake and predatory ones. So, really, it's worth your time as a researcher putting in some effort thinking about journal selection. And many researchers, like me, for example, don't really do that. They just write the paper, send it off to a journal, and hope for the best. That is obviously not the best strategy to be a successful writing and publishing academic. So, have a think about which journal factor is most important to you. Aims and scopes, readership, the kind of article that you might write, article type, article length, the publication speed, the frequency of your journal, how fast will your paper come out, the indexing, the rank, the impact factor of your target journal. Will it be print online? Will it be open access? As we've just been discussing in the first part of our event today, and what's the acceptance rate of your target journal? These are all things to think about before selecting a journal. So let's have another quick poll. Let's bring back Scott to run this poll. What's going on, Scott? How did
Okay, let's try our next poll. The question is, when should you select a journal? When is the best time? Before writing your manuscript, while writing your manuscript, or after writing your manuscript? Sometimes this is a controversial question, Gareth, isn't it?
Yes, because we talk to lots of researchers, and it's still very common for researchers to write a paper and then think, where am I going to publish this piece of work? Very, very common. It's, of course, not wrong to do it that way. We wouldn't say you can't do it that way, but it may not be the most effective publication strategy, right, Scott?
Exactly. We're suggesting the best time or the ideal time. So let's see what our guests said. I think most of our guests are on the right track here. Let's end the poll there and share the results. Great. I think most of us selected before writing your manuscript. Gareth, you're going to explain to us why it's best to write before, I think, right?
Yes, absolutely. Well done, everybody. That's what we were recommending in this webinar. Very, very, very good idea to think about where you're going to publish your research before you begin the writing process. Have your message in mind. That comes with experience. As you do more research, you develop more skills as a researcher, you start to get better at seeing a piece of data, a set of results, and then targeting that to a particular journal. You can see where you might be able to publish that paper. So message, audience, and structure are key things to have in mind before you begin to write. And this is key because, as you know, every journal is different. Every journal has different scope, different audience, message, audience, and structure. The kind of article that you might end up writing will be different. Will it be a letter, a rapid communication? And you have to self-evaluate. Learn those skills in self-evaluation to determine, to decide, to see where you might be able to publish your next paper. So, as we've been talking about in this event, select before writing, consider using preprint servers, look at which journals your international colleagues, leaders in your field, are writing and sending their papers to. Have a look at their websites. See where those 5 or 10 big experts in your research area around the world are publishing their work, and go after those journals as well, because other experts in your field will be reading those journals. So write a ranked list of maybe 5 or 10 journals to target and aim high. But you've also got to learn the skills to choose appropriately with your paper. And of course, you can do this in part by making pre-submission inquiries to journals. There's no reason why you can't do that. You can make pre-submission inquiries to journals. I've just lost my screen share. Let me just put that back. What's happening now? Can you see my screen? Everything's okay? I hope so. No?
Yeah, now we're just seeing you. I think if you go back to the previous view, we should be able to see your screen again.
Okay, 1 second. Sorry, everybody. I pressed a button by mistake there.
That's okay. While we're getting our screen shared again, thank everyone for your comments. I'm really interested to hear about your experiences with publishing in Polish journals. And of course, if you have any questions for Gareth, we'd be happy to answer them at the end of the talk today.
Okay, fantastic. That should be back again. Sorry about that.
No
All
problem.
right, so we're talking about journal section before you start to write. Considering using preprint servers, look at which journals your international colleagues are reading and submitting to, and do have a think about making pre-submission inquiries. We have this little checklist here, 6 ways to self-evaluate your paper. How novel is the work that you've done within known contexts? How good are your methods, the study design, the data analysis? Have you minimized bias to maximize your study's validity and reliability? What are the real world implications of your work and for how long? Because this will determine the impact of the journal that you can target. Is your study ethically compliant? This will be checked by a journal at submission and could lead to desk rejection, as we call it, if it's not, if you don't have all of those forms, ethical statements in place. And also, is your writing readable and suitable for non-specialist readers? Much less of an issue these days in the age of AI tools for writing. Do get in touch. We've got lots of content and helpful ideas about how you can write effectively and ethically using AI. But watch out for fake journals. There are many open access journals because of that cost to publish model that we talked about earlier that are fake, known as predatory journals. They'll try to cheat you out of your money and out of your research. And it's getting quite sophisticated how they do that. So be aware of this. Check those open access journals carefully. They will be listed and indexed in the major databases: COPE, DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, OASPA, and so on. The journal that you choose, Bentham Science, should have a robust peer review process. Of course, you don't expect to write and publish a paper and for it to just appear in a journal. And the fees and policies are fair, clearly listed and explained in detail. These are ways to know a real journal as a researcher. Any questions? Get in touch. Have a look at the website Think, Check, Submit, a fantastic resource for researchers around the world, as well as those other databases that we've looked at in this event. And there are resources as well that we share here to help you select open access journals like Spark, Sherpa Romeo, the DOAJ, as we've talked about, the Directory of Open Access Journals, Think, Check, Submit. So put some time into selecting a journal. Do it before you start to write your paper and check carefully that the journal you may be picking or identifying really is an, a credible journal, not a fake journal that's going to try to take your hard-earned money away from you. So, having talked about publishing and open access and journal selection and submission, let's move on and talk a little bit about understanding and communicating with editors, which, as we mentioned earlier, is often something that researchers don't know that they can do. Can you make pre-submission inquiries? Absolutely, right, Scott. A very, very good strategy to pick a.
This is something that I learned from you, Gareth, is this approach to selecting a journal. It really is, there's no cost, there's no commitment. It's an easy way to just simply reach out to a journal and ask if they might be interested in publishing something like the research that you're doing.
It's a great idea. Higher impact factor journals ask you to do this anyway because they get lots of submissions and they need a way to sort those incoming submissions. There's no real limit to this. Write to editors before formal submission. Give them your abstract and working title. It'll help you to get a target journal because those editors, you can write to 10, 15 journals. They might reply and say, "Great, Scott, fantastic. We'd love to see that paper submitted to our journal."
Absolutely. And here's a poll. Oops, let me try to relaunch that poll again. I lost that for a moment. Let's try that again. Sorry. Okay, there we go. The question is, how many pre-submission inquiries can you send to journals at a time? Only one, up to three, or unlimited? Let's see what our guests think.
The questions this evening are remarkably easy. We need to test our audience a bit better in the next Polish consortium event. Let's see how we do, everybody.
We'll come up with some more challenging questions next time. These are just sort of checking if you're awake style questions. Actually, this is a common question that we get from researchers. And in fact, we had one colleague online who was challenging the very idea of sending pre-submission inquiries recently.
Indeed, indeed, yes, yes. So we may talk about that a bit later in the Q&A for sure. But like, how are we doing? What are the outcomes here?
Okay, let's check the results. So it looks like most of our guests answered correctly that you can send any number of pre-submission inquiries. And we will share with you a template later that you can use to reach out to journals to send an email. And you're a journal editor yourself, Gareth. So how do you feel about receiving an inquiry email from an author?
I love it. And this is something that lots of researchers maybe not feel comfortable with or perhaps don't understand. You can communicate with editors. They love it actually if you get in touch with them because you're doing that, you're making their lives easier. The pre-submission inquiry stage is actually helping journal editors. So do get in touch, do reach out. We've put together this handy field guide to different kinds of editors that you might encounter in your publishing journey. Managing editors at journals. They're there to develop perhaps a series of journals in a portfolio from a business perspective. You may never interact with such an individual in your academic career. You will, however, interact with academic and language editors in your academic research career. The academic editor is controlling peer review, deciding what gets sent up the food chain for decisioning higher up the journal or making those decisions themselves, whereas a language editor is working on the English. They're working in a subject area, helping with the English. Less and less of these at the moment, of course, thanks to AI, but editors are looking for an effective introduction that provides context by discussing the existing information around a topic. They're looking for great figures and results that discuss new information about a topic. And they're also looking for a discussion in your article that synthesizes your new information in the context of existing information to emphasize its value in the field. So do have a look at these slides because they come from our experience working with editors and working with authors, putting papers together successfully that do get published. Editors are looking for suitability. Is your paper that you've just sent to their journal suitable? That's why it's important to think about doing pre-submission inquiries. Will the paper that you're about to send likely be downloaded and cited? That's what they're thinking about. So put yourself into the mind of an editor when you start to make a submission. Reviewers, on the other hand, peer reviewers, are looking for credibility. Is the study important for the field? Are the data and interpretations trustworthy? Have a think about these elements before you write your next paper because we guarantee it will help you to get your work more successfully published. Communication as well is key in successful academic publishing. And we get letters like this all the time as researchers. Thank you for sending us your paper. It's good and original, but we're not willing to publish it because the good bits aren't original and the original bits aren't good. So how can we avoid getting these kinds of letters from journals? Well, one way is a pre-submission inquiry. The other way is good journal selection, as we've talked about. Thirdly, put time and energy into a great cover letter when you send your paper in to a journal. Maximize your chances of success. The cover letter that you send with your paper is one of the first sections that an editor is going to read, so make sure it makes sense. Why is the topic important? Why are the results significant? What's the key result, the breakthrough? Why is this an advance on previous work? Why this journal? Editors love it if you talk about their journal. And don't forget, if you can, if you're allowed to, provide peer reviewer suggestions. This, of course, is the worst kind of cover letter. Absolutely nothing. We've all done it. I've done it. It's late in the day. I want to go home. I just want to get my paper submitted. I don't do a decent cover letter. This is really, really bad. Also, though, is the almost worst kind of cover letter, the boring one. Dear editor, please find our paper enclosed, which we hope you will find interesting. A waste of time for you and the editor. It's not giving them any useful information. What we want is a good, effective cover letter that captures the editor's attention. Give them information about why they should consider your paper suitable for their journal and why it will be downloaded and why it will be cited. Have a think about those elements that editors look for, as we talked about a little bit earlier. We've got a fantastic free template that you can download using this amazing QR code. Scott, bless him, will send this to you as well in follow-up from this event this evening. You can edit it, you can cut it down, you can use it as a way to write a fantastic cover letter for your next paper. That's a free gift to everybody listening to this Bentham Science event with us today. The first step of article submission, sending your paper into a journal, the first step, as we've also talked about before, the editors and the editorial team check the paper against the journal criteria. Is it suitable for publication in that journal? Desk editors look at whether your paper fits with the journal's scope. Does it have a clear message? Is it original? Is it important? Is it true? And is it relevant to our readers? If you don't fit these criteria, you're probably going to get what we call a desk rejection. You've got to sell yourself. You've got to write a great cover letter. You've got to tell the editors why your paper is important and interesting. High impact factor journals want to maintain those high rejection rates because that's part of how they get a high impact factor. So many papers going to high impact factor journals get rejected before peer review. So do keep that in mind as a researcher. We've talked about publishing and open access. We've talked about journal selection, understanding and communicating with editors. What comes next, Scott?
Next, we'll talk about peer review, and you'll give us some of your tips. And just a quick mention, one of our guests said that they were having some trouble hearing you, Gareth. Is anyone else having any issues hearing us? Hopefully you can hear us okay. If anyone is not hearing us, just let us know in the chat. Otherwise,
Mhm.
we'll continue. Everyone okay? Yeah.
I hope so. We do have several recordings of events similar to this that we can also share if necessary, if there's an audio issue. But I hope that everything seems to be working okay, bar
I
my
think we're okay.
mistakes with screen sharing and stuff.
Yeah. Could be one guest maybe had their audio muted or something. So I think we're okay. Yeah, I think we're good to continue. Over to you, Gareth.
Peer review, the final component of our event today. Writing to editors is very important as you communicate with editors at journals. Where's my paper? I've waited 2 months. Looking forward to an immediate reply is not a great way to talk to anyone, let alone an editor who's going to be making a decision about whether they want to publish your article. I'm writing to ask if I can do something to help speed up my recent submission to your journal. Can I make some suggestions for additional peer reviewers? Is a much more helpful, outgoing, sharing way of writing to an editor. Communication is absolutely important. It's key. And the same goes, by the way, for responding to review comments. Make sure editors and peer reviewers feel good about your responses because if they feel good, they're more likely to give your article a positive review. So thank them. We would like to thank the reviewers for the interest in this topic. The reviewer has correctly pointed out. We acknowledge that. We concur. Thank you for the detailed comments, your valuable insights. These comments significantly enhance the quality of our work rather than bad, negative, aggressive responses to comments that you get in peer review. Even if you feel badly treated, we'll talk about that in a moment, don't show that in the way that you respond to peer review comments. Make people feel good, be polite, you're going to have a better chance of success. We would like to thank the 2 reviewers who worked on our paper for their considerable efforts and the time they devoted. If I'm a reviewer and I read that, I'm going to think, well, I did devote a considerable amount of time. Nice that they noticed. So do that when you respond to peer review. Make a document that intersperses your comments with the comments that are raised in the peer review process and address all of those comments because it's very important. Show the editor, show the peer reviewers that you take the process seriously. Do it in a different color. Do it in a different font so the editor, someone like me, can easily scan your document, your response document, and see all of the changes that you've made quickly and easily. Very important as well. Effectively responding to peer review comments is a skill that you can learn, and it will help you to be more effective getting your papers published. So, also, when you get comments back, have a look at the language that the journal's using, because if it's minor comments, small comments, probably the reviewers will not be involved anymore in the process. Just the editor will look at your revisions. Whereas if the comments are bigger, or they're using words like major or considerable changes, then probably the paper will go back to the reviewers. So keep that in mind when you make your responses. Who's going to be likely to read them is important to keep in mind. Be comprehensive. Show the editor that you take the process seriously, and perseverance is the key to success here. We've got another fantastic peer review email template that we're going to give you as a free gift. It's here to download. Scan the fantastic QR code. Scott will send you this as well in follow-up after the event, right, Scott?
Yeah, we'll send this out tomorrow. If you're not able to scan the QR code now, don't worry. We'll send you links to all of the documents that Gareth mentioned tonight. The email will go out about 24 hours after this event finishes. We'll send you a link to the full video that you can review. So if you missed any of Gareth's tips, you can just review the video. You can scan through, has the full transcript, has the full chat. And also, we'll share these templates with you in that email tomorrow. So check your inbox. We'll send you everything.
This is the third one, another absolutely fantastic template for you. This is a template to use if your paper's taking too much time and you want to write to an editor to ask for more information in a polite, sharing, caring, and cordial manner. You can download this one as well. We've got a bunch of these that we've collected over the years. We're happy to share them with everybody. Scott, as we mentioned, I'll be sending these in follow up after the event as well. And don't worry if your paper gets rejected, I would say as well. This happens more often than not. It's important to learn from rejection. Ignore those negative comments. Don't take on board negative, aggressive comments. Learn from the comments that you feel are constructive. Maybe there are some comments about your work that you can build on, that you can learn from. And if you genuinely feel that your research was important, well done, and deserves to reach that journal's audience, it's always worth considering writing an appeal letter to the editor, especially if you disagree with the peer reviewer's comments. Because what's the worst that can happen after all? The worst, of course, is that your paper is going to stay rejected. So do that. I have a number of examples from my own career, Nature papers, for example, that would not have been published, would not have gotten published had we not communicated with the editor, talked to the editor, got back in touch with the editor and asked for another round of reviews because we felt that we were unfairly or inaccurately treated by aggressive or reviewers who didn't fully understand what was happening in the first round. So confidence is one of the keys to success as an international researcher. So keep that in mind. Talk to editors, communicate with them politely and constructively. And if you have questions about how long your paper's taking, who the peer reviewers are, finding peer reviewers, or issues in the peer review process, talk to your editor. Absolutely critical piece of advice that I would share, that we would share with everybody. We have talked in this Bentham Science supported event today about publishing and open access, journal selection and submission, understanding and communicating politely, constructively with editors, and finally, the peer review process. Scott and I do lots of these events. If you'd like another one for your university or for your research group, do get in touch. And with that, we are here to answer any of your questions, right, Scott?
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Gareth, for sharing your insights with us tonight. And let's see if we have any questions from our guests. We had an interesting case study from Trev. Thank you, Trev, for sharing that experience. So, as I understand it, Trev, there's a point system that favors Polish publishers, and you get more points if you publish within those domestic publishers, and fewer points if you publish with international publishers, even though those international publishers might have more reach and impact. I'm curious to think what Gareth thinks about this situation. So I hope I've explained it well. If not, please correct me, Trev, in the chat. But this is an interesting system where if you
Mhm.
publish locally,
Uh-huh.
you gain more points on the point system. But if you publish internationally, you sacrifice points, but you might increase your impact. Have you
Uh-huh.
experienced this kind of publishing scenario, Gareth?
Not in exactly that way. I think that's quite unique potentially. I mean, there are many countries that prioritize their own journals or journals owned and operated within that country. One good example is China, for example. Researchers are now being told by the funding agencies, let's say you publish 10 papers a year, would be great, wouldn't it? To publish 10 papers a year. You must publish a certain proportion of those papers in local journals. So I mean it's something that the world is moving towards, I think, to get away from like big conglomerate multinational publishers who are taking a lot of research funding in these APCs. So yeah, great. And thank you, Monica, for sharing that link. I think that's really interesting for everybody. Thanks a lot. And thank you, Trev. It's really interesting. We should write a blog about that. Perhaps, Trev, you'll get in touch with us afterwards and we can share more information in the future.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I guess it is a way to build up the domestic publishing, industry, and I understand that. But at the same time, as you correctly said, Trevor, it can perhaps impact your global reach and impact. So interesting case. Thank you for sharing that with us. If anyone has any other questions for Gareth, feel free to share them either in the chat or in the Q&A. I do have a question from one of our guests here. We have a number of questions about open access. So here's a question, Gareth. If I publish open access, do I keep my copyright?
Yes. Almost always the answer to that question is yes. I mean, it can depend a little bit on the publisher. Some publishers use different CC licenses to others, but 99.9% of the time you would keep the copyright. Why is that important? Well, in traditional publishing, in subscription journal publishing, so all of those journals that we try to access and we can't get access because our institution doesn't have a subscription, so we have to go over and look at like, one of those sites that we all know about to get access to all of the different content. In traditional journal publishing, you sign over the copyright to the publisher, which is something that a lot of researchers may not realize. And it's important. What if you want to write a textbook and use information from one of your own papers? What if the research that you've done is going to be commercializable? It's going to be made into an industry application or a drug, for example. You certainly would want to hold on to the copyright, or at least your institution would. And that's one important reason why open access publishing is really, really popular amongst researchers and funding agencies.
Hmm. Okay, interesting. Related questions about open access. Let's see here. Do open access articles really get cited more, or does that depend? Well, that's interesting. Does it depend
Yeah.
on things like discipline, I wonder?
No, there's data that shows quite a lot of data that shows that the answer to that question is yes. If you publish a paper open access, you're probably going to get about 7 times more downloads and relevant and therefore citations. Okay, because simply because more people will know about the paper, more people will cite the paper. Whereas if it's published, if the paper's published in a subscription journal, it's more difficult to access, it's more difficult to learn about. So the answer to that question is a categorical yes. And if you're interested, get in touch with us and we'll share with you some recent data that backs up that statement. So thank you for that question. Great question.
It's a great question. And I guess a related question would be, is open access always better? You mentioned better citations, but is it always better, or are there cases where traditional journals are still preferred? Okay, interesting. So,
No, that's an interesting question. It depends what your criteria is for choosing a journal, because if your criteria or your institution or your funding agency is prioritizing impact factor, which is the case in many places in the UK, where I'm from, that's the case at institutions, at universities, you're going to get more not points, but more kind of credit, if you like, within your department if you publish in higher impact factor journals more often. And it is the case. It's increasingly less the case, but because the subscription journals are often older, and in some cases a lot older than their open access counterparts, they do tend to have higher impact factors. Okay. So that would be the answer to that question. If your choice for a journal is determined by impact factor, then open access journals may not be the best choice for you. But we have other information on that too. Citations do not necessarily correspond with impact factor. By the way, it may be better to publish a paper in a slightly lower impact factor open access journal and get more citations, you know? So it's swings and roundabouts, as we like to say in England. So but it depends.
Hmm. That's interesting. That's interesting. Thanks for your question and thank you for your insights. Gary, I think we still have time for some more questions.
Absolutely.
I can see the conversation with Trev and Monica very interesting. And Trev, I'm happy to hear that you chose University of Edinburgh. That's where my parents graduated. So great to hear that. And also interesting, you mentioned slow review and publication. Trev says a science colleague waited for 2 years for a review. Came back as this is out of date. Oh no. And he was too polite to push the
Well,
journal. Yeah, as you
that's
always say, Gareth,
outrageous
don't
too.
wait, communicate, right? Don't wait,
One of, one,
communicate.
one of our catchphrases, one day we'll make it into a t-shirt. Don't wait. Scott says you should communicate. Yes, because that happens very often that researchers end up waiting for a long time to get peer review back simply because they haven't gotten in touch with the journal and talked to the editor. I mean, editors are very often academics like yourselves, working at institutions, editing a journal in their spare time. They may not be 100% on top of everything that's happening within the journal. So they need help. They need to be reminded if you wait for more than 6 to 8 weeks for peer review comments to come back, get in touch with the editor. Do not wait longer than 6 to 8 weeks for those peer review comments to come back. You must write to the editor in a polite way, in a constructive way, as we've talked about today. Give them suggestions for additional reviewers. Offer to do something to help with the process. Don't write, "Where's my paper?" Blah. Like, get in touch and be polite, and that will give you a kick start towards successful publishing. Okay, don't be shy. And we see that a lot with researchers around the world.
Great advice, Gareth. And I've just shared another link to that folder. We'll send this also in the email tomorrow when we follow up. But this is the folder that contains all of your templates, Gareth, including a template for following up on peer review. If peer review is slow, responses are coming back slowly, and you want to gently and politely ask the editor for the status of your paper, that's the template that you can follow. It's in that Drive folder along with the other templates today. So, as Gareth always says, don't wait, communicate.
You
Great
must, you
advice.
must. You've only got one career, right? You've got to make sure that your papers get published in a timely fashion. So very important.
Great. We have time for a few more questions, I think. Some questions about preprints. Will posting my paper as a preprint prevent journal publication later? Well, that's a common concern. Your thoughts, Gareth?
No, it won't, because most journals, 90% of journals welcome preprinting of papers before peer review and publication, and many journals have it in their workflow anyway. So, for example, if you send a paper to any of the Springer Nature journals, you will be asked at the submission point, would you like to preprint this paper on Research Square, which is the Springer Nature owned preprint platform? So the answer to this question in short is no. Almost all journals, apart from the very, very high impact ones, Nature, Science, the Lancet, those top tier, really high impact factor journals, welcome the pre-printing of studies, pre-peer review and publication. And it's a good idea. As we learned during the pandemic, for example, if people hadn't been sharing early stage research on preprint platforms, we wouldn't have gotten so much information as quick as we did about the latest developments in viral research, vaccine research, and so on. Preprints also, though, as Scott will attest, the work is not peer reviewed. So you have to be careful with what you're reading. A lot of it is not peer reviewed, of course. So anyone can preprint anything. So be aware of that as well when looking at preprint platforms.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thanks for your question. And questions, moving on to some of the other topics that you covered today, Gareth, questions about journal selection. So let's see if I can choose a fairly universal question here. Okay, here's a good numerical question for you, Gareth. How many journals should I target for one paper? So you mentioned some strategies for selecting journals, narrowing that list down,
Mhm.
self-evaluating your paper. So if I want to submit, how many journals should I narrow my list down to?
Um, I would go for like a short list of like 3 to 5 journals that could be good for the paper and that you would be happy to see the paper published in that fit the requirements, the kind of um, elements that your university or your funding agency is looking for. I mean, obviously you can send hundreds of pre-submission inquiries, but you'll quickly get a reputation for doing that because, journal editors talk to each other. Peer review pools within particular fields are often quite small or very small. So I would, narrow it down, start with a short list of 3 or 5, see what responses you get, and then go with the journal with which you get the most favorable response from the editor. I think that is my strategy when recommending to researchers how to publish their papers.
Hmm. Great. That's a great question and great advice. I have a question for you, Gareth, to sum up some of the questions that we've gotten from our guests. And I think my question might sort of summarize some of those other questions. The question is, what common mistakes? So you've published more than 300 papers yourself, and you mentioned that when you were a young researcher, that you perhaps didn't select a journal very scientifically or selectively. What common mistakes do early career researchers make when selecting a journal? What are some of the most common mistakes in journal selection?
Yeah, I would say doing it too quickly, rushing to make a submission to the first journal that pops up, following like, advice from people who may not have your best interests at heart, potentially copying like, your supervisor's favorite journal, for example. I mean, just doing it too quickly and not putting enough thought into the process is really, really important. I mean, you don't want to sit there in 10 years' time and think, oh, I wish I'd published that paper in a much better journal, as was the case for me in a number of the projects that I worked on. So it's worth taking a few more days, having a think about where you could publish, writing to some editors, talking to colleagues, talking to friends in other countries, in other research groups, getting advice, and making a good choice. Yeah, thanks for the great question.
Great question. Great question. Another quick question, I can answer this one. What exactly should I write in a pre-submission email? Great question. We have included a template. It's in that Google Drive folder that I linked to. We'll send you a link to that template in tomorrow's email. It's got Garrett's magic formula pre-submission inquiry email. You can just change the details and send those to a journal editor, and you're sorted. So that should be an easy one to answer. Um, let's see. Let's go on maybe for one more question, Gareth, if we just have a moment here. Um, how should I respond if I strongly disagree with a peer reviewer's comment? Ah, okay. Again, we've included a template for responding to peer review. Gareth, in brief, if you strongly disagree with a reviewer's comment, how should you respond?
Yeah, this is a great and very common question. You can't just say, I disagree with the reviewer's comment, he or she is an idiot or something aggressive like that. And that happens all the time. You must have evidence, you must have data, you must have references, citations to back up your opinion. Reviewers can say anything about your paper when they're asked to look at it by a journal. But if you are going to respond effectively, you have to convince that editor that you are correct. So that's done politely and with references, citations, and backing up your argument. So if you think somebody is incorrect, you have to show that to the editor. Great question. And thank you, everybody, for all of the fantastic questions and for joining this Bentham Science event today. Here are the fantastic Bentham Science social media channels, which we'd love you to follow.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. We wish great success to all of our colleagues in Poland and all of your future publications. And thank you so much for joining and for asking great questions. And Gareth, thank you also, as always, for making time to share your expertise with us. And thank you so much again.